Mother cries after discovering what her children were doing in the bathroom in secret. Mom can't stop yelling when she finds out what her daughter was doing in the bathroom with her brother. Susie and Timmy were siblings with a bond like any other. They were unconditionally and all friends at an age when many would be arguing and in regular confrontations. Susie was 7 years old and Timmy was 5, and they loved each other more than anyone else in the world. Susie, as the oldest, served as a mentor to her younger brother, and the fact is that both of their parents had lived such carefree lives that the girl learned a lot about life on her own or at school, where she had a teacher who was always willing to answer all of her questions and explain everything she was learning. She also passed it on to her younger brother, and the two of them managed to navigate through life with only each other's help. However, they were still children and required parental care. They needed them to see past the two mouths that need to be fed. They wanted to be taken seriously, so they worked hard every day to convince them that they, too, struggled, felt, and understood life, so they could take the time to explain and guide them. That, however, never seemed to happen. When Timmy became ill, things got even worse. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to be inspired by these real-life stories on a daily basis. Now, let's return to the story. Every day he complained that his stomach hurt, but because it coincided with the start of school for the boy, his parents assumed he was simply trying to avoid going to school, and they were even more enraged when the boy told them that his stomach didn't stop hurting and that he felt like vomiting when he ate. Timmy was still sick 6 months later, and he wasn't getting the help he needed. It became even worse when he began vomiting at night. Susie told her parents that her younger brother had vomited his food, but they assumed it was just indigestion and that he'd be fine the next day. And since there was no way they'd believe Timmy that he was sick and injuring their dignity, the two siblings decided not to bother them any longer. Susie then assumed that she was the only one who could look after him because she was the only one who cared about him and never left him alone. Following him to the bathroom and holding him as he vomited became a habit that grew in frequency until it became a regular routine. The youngster was becoming thinner, pale, and feeble all of a sudden, and his school noticed it. When they asked Timmy's parents if he was sick, they flatly denied it and excused themselves by saying he was going through a stage of poor appetite, which they said was very common at his age because they'd gone through it as well, and that he would resume normal eating and his appearance would improve, but that it was not an illness. Meanwhile, Timmy was finding it increasingly difficult to keep his food down, and his attention and strength were gradually fading. In the classroom, he couldn't focus, and he didn't have the same amount of enthusiasm as the other kids when they went out to play. He preferred to sit in the sun and often fell asleep, and despite the fact that many people saw them, only Susie could tell he was sick, and she could only hope that someone would see him soon. When the mother walked into the bathroom one night, she discovered a scene she'd never expected to see. Susie was helping her little brother hold himself up as he was vomiting, a red vomit that seemed to tear the boy apart from the inside out. And when the boy finished and looked at her, she realized she'd been blind for a long time and began screaming in shock. Her son was sick. She didn't know what it was, but he'd been unwell for a time, and it was evident that the children had told them and they hadn't listened. So they'd chosen to fend for themselves by making as little noise as possible, pretending to be doing something wrong in the process. Susie and Timmy were so young that they had no idea how serious it could be for the poor child to puke like that and go without treatment for severe stomach troubles. They also didn't realize that none of it was their fault, but rather the fault of negligent parents who hadn't paid attention. Susie merely wanted to make her brother feel better, and the child admired her for it, and because she was his biggest supporter and the only one who was always looking out for him. His parents, on the other hand, had no concept of love or caring. They'd never paid attention to the boy when he complained that his stomach hurt hundreds of times, figuring that it was just a juvenile technique to avoid eating his food and that nothing was seriously wrong with him. They never considered the possibility that their son was ill or that his frequent complaints about discomfort were unusual. And the truth is that there are parents for whom this title is too huge, parents who ignore their children, feeling that their role is confined to providing a roof over their heads and food when it's much more. And if a parent is unwilling to accompany their child on every step they take, to lead them, to teach them how to face life and to be a good person, then something must be done to put them in their place. And it was exactly what Timmy's parents needed. The wake-up call that the physicians delivered them that tough night when Timmy's little body appeared to be unable to struggle any longer. And now he was in the emergency room, where he remained for several days, despite the fact that they were slow to recognize what was wrong with him and required to do several tests. Everyone in the unit, including doctors and nurses, were horrified when the diagnosis was ultimately given. The boy was suffering from fatal cancer, which could have been beaten a long time ago if Timmy's parents had listened to what they were informed. Timmy's mother had not yet recovered from her shock, and Timmy's father was feeling like the most miserable guy. How could his son be on the verge of death when he had asked for their attention from the beginning? How had they been able to disregard their own son's suffering while focusing on other things? Not even Susie, who insisted on taking her brother to the doctor every day. Both of them couldn't believe their own indolence, let alone their nefarious behavior. And the speeches they were given at the hospital just added to their misery. It was, nevertheless, well-deserved. They were repeatedly chastised by all medical authorities during Timmy's stay in the hospital. Some nurses were unable to communicate with them. Timmy was once again the center of attention, and he had to be saved at any cost. After a few weeks, though, they realized they'd come too late. There was no way to save the small child. And in the middle of her grief and sorrow, his sister's sole solace was that Timmy's final words to her were to thank her, to tell her to be happy because he'd be watching over her from heaven. And that was why he was at peace. The calmness that echoed in his final breath and the image of the youngster was almost angelic. Timmy's parents could never get over the fact that their son died as a result of their actions, and they tried everything they could to make up for what they'd done by lavishing excessive care on Susie. Susie, on the other hand, had learned to stand up for herself, and while she grew up and learned to forgive her parents, their relationship never truly healed. The memory of Timmy was still sad, but it also inspired her every day, and she found a way to achieve the goals she'd set for herself as she got older. She had made it her mission, ever since she had bid goodbye to her younger brother, to open a hospital that would treat children with cancer, and she didn't stop until she'd done so. Susie became the face of the fight against pediatric cancer in her country, and she aided without looking back. And with all her love, to the end of her days, since her brother never ceased motivating her, even after all these years. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone else who might enjoy it as well. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.